This is our fourth Bowie album overall. This is the third Bowie album of the 70s. It is the third consecutive Bowie album that we're going to be doing. Remember, to start the 70s, he did The Man Who Sold the World, which we did not cover. But Josh gave a thumbs in the middle review to on his listen. And I would probably say the same thing. We then went into Hunky Dory, which we did cover. And then we went into, obviously, Ziggy Stardust, which was his breakthrough, I guess you would say. Certainly in the United States it was his breakthrough, and it certainly catapulted him to superstardom in the UK. And then Aladdin Sane was the follow-up to that. If I remember correctly, I think Diamond Dogs is next, and we don't do that one. And then we revisit him when he's in full Plastic Soul, or Philadelphia Soul. That's like the next Bowie incarnation before he does the Berlin trilogy. So we're going to cover pretty much all of those albums along the way, but I don't think we do Diamond Dogs next. So I'll catch you up on Diamond Dogs when we do the next Bowie album.
He also has this album called Pinups that seems to just be a cover of British songs that came out after this, or same year actually as this album.
Yes, I apologize. There is the Pinups album, but yeah, that's basically a covers album that I think began to introduce they always call it like the Philly soul period he had, and then he creates the Thin White Duke, the second big persona of the 70s, which I won't get too much into that because when we get there, I'll go back and do, as you said, Pinups and Diamond Dogs in terms of wrapping it up, because we'll be talking about Bowie plenty as the 70s go on. But at this point, we're talking about Aladdin Sane, which was released on April 13th, 1973. It has all of the Spiders from Mars in it, as well as pianist Mike Garson, which you can hear quite a bit on this. There is quite a bit of piano. A little bit of context for this album.
Wait, John, you need some numbers.
Oh, I'm sorry, Matt. I plowed into that. Yeah, give me some numbers, Matt.
Number 84 in the 1970s on Best Ever Albums. Number 9 in 1973. Number 318 overall. It is Bowie's 7th highest-ranked album on Best Ever Albums. And it's not on Rolling Stone's list at all.
Okay. Well, thank you, Matt. Thanks for reminding me and giving that information as well. So context for this album, Bowie wrote this album while he was on tour in the United States. This album is often mentioned as Ziggy Stardust, and even Bowie said this, it's Ziggy Stardust Goes to the United States. So Aladdin Sane is an alter ego of both Bowie and Ziggy Stardust to some degree. As with Bowie, he tells like 15 different origin stories, right? And so you piece them together and kind of figure out which ones make the most sense. But I think what most people have thought is the cleanest way of describing this is, Bowie became uber super famous with Ziggy Stardust, and he kind of, he was always about reinvention, but he kind of knew he had to ride out the Ziggy Stardust wave here for a while, and so he was still in the peak of that, but kind of wanted to play some other songs. So Aladdin Sane was a sort of a different spin on the Ziggy Stardust character. Almost everywhere you read, and Bowie himself says it, he was being highly influenced by the idea of the United States at this point. Most people say he was like simultaneously like appalled and riveted and fascinated by the United States, which I think seems to be a view of many people in the world when they come. Like, the United States is both remarkably full of opportunity and also remarkably full of, vice and excess, and depending on where you look, right? And so this album kind of covers both of those things. Even the album cover of this is a very iconic David Bowie picture, him with his face painted. At the time that it was shot, it was the most expensive album cover ever done to that point in time.
Why?
Because of the quality of the people involved with it, the quality of the film, right? The resolution of the film, the fact that there were lots of different reshoots. You can find an extraordinary amount of information about this album cover, by the way, when you do research. It to the point where I was trying to go into it, but it would have squeezed out so much other stuff that I'll kind of just say that it was designed to sort of be a merge between two different things. It was David Bowie and the Aladdin Sane character, right? That was one way. And then the other was the Aladdin Sane character and the Ziggy Stardust character with the Bowie, persona housing both, right? And as we mentioned in the last one, Bowie was struggling with creating these characters and not getting caught up in the performance art aspect of this. And, he would later talk about how difficult that was. But this is the peak of that. And he often says he was struggling with his mental health. At this point, he'd begun taking cocaine, which would be something that would linger with him throughout the mid-'70s. It wasn't really until he gets to Germany where he dries out of that. I guess does the equivalent of drying out from cocaine. I'm pretty sure heroin gets thrown in there at some point as well, but at this point it was cocaine for sure. And he also was ridiculously prolific in 1973. Just to give you an idea, along with making this album and that Pinups album that Josh mentioned, he also was the producer for Raw Power by the Stooges, which we'll cover next week, and Transformer by Lou Reed, which we'll cover in a Cold Listen Hot Take as well. So that's, 4 mainstream albums there. He also, just as a toss-off, wrote the song All the Young Dudes that he threw to Mott the Hoople. So, he was just ridiculously prolific in 1973. I won't say peak Bowie, but in terms of, output, the thing about Bowie at this point in time is he is just... Every act, it feels like, in popular music is somehow tied to Bowie, being watched by Bowie, being influenced or influencing Bowie. His Venn diagram is insane. Everything totally overlaps with everything else. So that's pretty incredible, I think, when you look at it. This was Bowie's most, to this point in his career, it was his most commercially successful album. It hit #1 in the UK immediately, which, if you remember, even Ziggy Stardust didn't do. It did later as a reissue. And it hit number 17 in the US, which was the highest chart spot for any David Bowie album in the United States up until that point. We mentioned before that America was very much an influence on this. One of the things is that all of the songs, and it's actually mentioned on the original album's sleeve, each song sort of had a second title that was tied to either the city it was recorded in or about the city that to some degree loosely influenced the song. So like Jean Genie is about New York. Obviously, there's a song about Detroit that's referenced in the name. Time is New Orleans. And so each one sort of has its own tie to a city. So, I can, as we're talking about this, if you're curious, I can pull that information up as well. This is still considered glam rock Bowie. Yep. He still is doing glam rock at this point. It's a harder edge, I would say, than Ziggy Stardust a little bit. It's heavier than Ziggy Stardust, but also has the piano that we saw in Hunky Dory. So it's a little bit merged together. Just some things to know. Each song sort of, Bowie went into more detail in terms of what inspired him on these songs than most. He was heavily inspired by the Stones all the way down to, doing a direct Stones cover. Let's Spend the Night Together on this album. He was also heavily influenced by the New York Dolls, who released their debut album in 1973. We are going to talk about the New York Dolls, and I feel the further and further we get into the 70s, right, as we get into things like punk and new wave and this year, 1973, the more covering that New York Dolls album feels like it's essential because they are starting to get name dropped pretty much everywhere, and they had quite a bit of influence on folks. But yeah, Bowie was heavily influenced by them on this album.
So are we not covering the New York Dolls that album? Or
no, we are. But
it's
remember, no, it's a full. I think
they don't have they're 220 in the 70s. For the highest ranked album. It's got to be a cold listen.
It's a cold listen hot take, and maybe we'll go a little longer than we normally do on that one, because that one just comes up constantly in the albums I'm covering in 1973. But, Bowie's and so Bowie, was also, the Panic in Detroit was basically Iggy Pop telling him about the 1967 Detroit riots and the rise of the White Panther Party that, Matt, you might remember we talked about in the MC5 episode. Right. Way back when, which, we name dropped that Monkees. I think that was the other half of that Monkees episode.
I think it might have been, yeah.
So if you want to go back deep into the stacks there, that was a two-parter way early in our run. And so another thing is The Prettiest Star has all kinds of different stuff. It was originally supposed to be the follow-up to Space Oddity and actually had Mark Bolan on the guitar, and then it just got scrapped and got rewritten, and then Mark Ronson replayed the Mark Bolan guitar part note for note on this album. So in case
wow.
you're wondering, that's what the Mark Bolan part would have been.
Okay.
Yep. So that's another, I thought, interesting one. It also was influenced by his first wife. So not Iman, the wife before that, as well. And so I thought that was a lot of really interesting stuff too. Follow Up Space Oddity, written for your first wife, and originally had Mark Bolan on guitar. That's a lot of stuff.
What's his first wife's name? I mean, I know I can look this up, but
I don't have it in front of me, man.
Okay.
And unfortunately, I'm not the level of detail oriented that you are on that one. I know that they had a very interesting marriage, like very interesting, i.e. very open. And there was a child they had together that, it was always a very interesting parenting flow, I think, a little bit. It was sort of, the child moved more into like peer from everything that I read, over the years, as opposed to like child and sort of,
Angie Barnett.
Angie Barnett, there you go. That's the name of his first wife. Yep.
Okay,
So
gotcha.
yeah, so for completists, there you go. Josh just cleaned that stack for us. Thank you very much.
Oh,
so
Duncan Jones is
his son. Yes.
Yeah, who's a filmmaker.
Yep.
That's how I know him.
And he's gone into many interviews about his childhood, not negatively, but kind of said it was atypical. So
Anybody surprised by that? Yeah, come on.
Yes. So we'll talk about that a little bit. So, all right, I feel like I've meandered a little bit. There's so much with Bowie during this. So much. It's like when Matt used to talk about the Beatles, like where to even cut it off. Like Bowie in the 70s it's hard to be an editor here. So I'll edit myself right there because I know the next Bowie one will encompass 3 years, which will seem like the all music guide that I'm reading right now in terms of length. All right. Anyway, Josh, thoughts? David Bowie, Aladdin, Sane.
So the first time I listened to this album, I was like, okay, this is good, but it's not as good as Ziggy Stardust. But the more I listened to it, and I listened to it more because we had more time too, so I think I listened to it maybe 4 times this time around. And I love this album. I think it's great. I think every song is fantastic, and I can, now that you say that there's an American influence on that, I can totally see that in the songs, not just lyrically, which I picked up on before, but musically and sonically.
And that's a good point, Josh, because he did specifically try to incorporate what he thought was an American sound. So good catch.
Yeah, I hear some like doo-wop type of Motown music maybe in some of this stuff, and so things like that too. And I love Mick Ronson's guitars on this album are amazing, and like On Time, his guitars are amazing on that. Panic in Detroit.
Yeah,
you could listen to this album just for the guitars. The other thing I noticed this time around is how integral the piano is into Bowie's music. I don't think I ever picked up on that just from listening to his hits and stuff, but that piano is all over this album, and he is a really good piano player, not surprisingly.
Well, it's not him.
Oh, it's not?
It's Mike Garson is the gentleman who's on here. Now, Bowie can play the piano, but Mike Garson was brought in to play the piano on most of these songs.
Oh, I see.
So,
okay.
There you go. Yep.
Gotcha. And the other prominent instrument I noticed was the saxophone. That came up a lot, which I guess is probably maybe a American influence as well, or what he's trying to put in on that.
There's two saxophonists on this album. Sorry, trying to add stuff
go for it,
because Josh is doing a great job on that. So 2 saxophonists on this album and 3 hired background vocalists as well.
In addition to Bowie too, though, didn't Bowie play sax?
Bowie on this album played some sax along with himself. So yeah, some of them had 3. He also is credited with playing the synthesizer, the mellotron, the harmonica, and the guitar on this album. But all the piano was most was Mike Garson and a little bit of Mick Ronson, who I believe I accidentally called Mark Ronson earlier. This as I think back on it, which unless we're talking about Uptown Funk.
Right.
So I apologize. I'll clean that stack there. But continue, Josh.
Gotcha. And so I guess what makes a really great album for me is the strength of the songs that aren't the hits, and I feel like every other song that's not a hit on this is really great, and he brings his unique Bowie flair to it. And I hear the other things. I hear T-Rex on this in like Cracked Actor, and I hear all the young dudes in Part of Time. I think it's the piano part that leads up into the chorus on Time. And then And then he does really interesting things like the Let's Spend the Night Together, which is basically like a Rolling Stones collaboration, because are Jagger and
Nope.
Keith on this?
No, they're not on it, believe it or not.
Okay.
It's actually, many people think that song, by the way, was supposed to be Let's Spend the Night Together written from the perspective of a gay man, as opposed to the heterosexual Mick Jagger, version of it.
Yeah.
Never there, but that's kind of what people have said. Yeah.
And then it just finishes strong too with Gene Genie and Lady Grinning the Soul, both really great songs. I really have no complaints about this. The more I listened to it, the more I appreciated it. I mean, that's a boring thing to say, but this is an incredibly strong album, and I feel like there's a lot of depth to it that rewards the re-listening. A question I have for you guys before we get Matt's takes: are you guys into the sort of different phases, the performing art aspect of it? Because you were talking about kind of the makeup and his characters that he was doing. I'm not sure I am a huge enough Bowie fan to like that aspect or want to delve into it. I think I'm just more of the music type of person. What do you think about that?
I don't really care a whole lot about that. I mean, I think it's interesting, and I would be interested in watching more about it, like a movie about it, or just his thought process or his inspiration. But it makes it a little bit more intriguing. But no, I'm here for the music, so that's more what I care about.
I'm total opposite. I'm fascinated by the constant
wow.
Okay. What makes Bowie Bowie to me? He makes great music, but what makes Bowie Bowie to me is how ahead of the curve he was for so long in terms of anticipating stuff and in terms of getting in right at the exact time when he didn't seem like a late arrival to any scene, and then being able to take it to some degree to the masses, and then equally fascinating, like when he lost his fastball in the mid to late 80s and early 90s and what it looked like before kind of rounding back into elder statesman Bowie, right? So for me, when I learned about Bowie's music, I also learned about his personas, and because to me, so much of Bowie's music is performance art and influenced by what he was doing. No different, Matt, than the Beatles, going to India or being burnt out from touring or, wanting to write more mature songs, blah, 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 stuff like that. To me, Bowie's like that, but also the performance art stuff, and then, he's got so many antecedents of Roxy Music and Brian Eno and, he going on with the German bands. He reinvented Iggy Pop's career, brought glam rock to some degree to the U.S. You know what I'm saying? So he's he's a very fascinating character to me that way. So yeah, I that's a huge part of what Bowie is to me.
Yeah, and I think that I would, like I said, I think that adds to it and it makes it more interesting. And maybe I would feel a little bit more into that if I lived, I was around at this time and I was into it. But he could still do all of those things, and the Beatles could have done all the stuff that they did. But if the music wasn't there, I wouldn't have cared nearly as much, So it's more about the music, and if he's got that other stuff to back it up to make it, more of a compelling story, or just to kind of, exemplify his, how forward thinking he was and how influential he was. I think all that's great, but for the most part, if I'm going to listen to him, I'm there for the music.
Right. Yeah, I think too because that aspect is so visual. You could not know about any of that, and just like most of the bands we listen to, I don't know what they look like, or I'm not thinking about what they look like when I'm listening to the album.
I mean, Bowie's different than a lot of the bands that we're listening to. At the same time, though.
I don't know if I agree with that, because I don't think David Bowie's David Bowie without the other aspect of it. If he's not that, he's just a very solid, critically acclaimed figure. What makes Bowie, in the pantheon of musicians, is the reinvention and the being at the, I don't mean to overuse the term zeitgeist. I know I've been using it, but if you're going to use it for anybody, he's the guy that jumped. I don't, for me, and I think for a lot of other people in music history, it's like Madonna to some degree. Like Madonna would be a really popular pop star, but because she was able to reinvent herself for, same, just like Bowie, for 12 to 15 years before sort of losing her fastball, Madonna transcended, just being a musician into sort of like a cultural icon, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, she was highly influenced by Bowie. So to me, I don't know. I don't think Bowie would be Bowie without creating the Ziggy Stardust personality, the performance art, you know, reinventing himself as the Thin White Duke, you know, the Berlin Bowie, you know. I might be a contrarian there on that one to you guys and say
I don't disagree with a whole lot that you're saying, though. I'm just saying that I care more about the music at the end of the day.
I also question, and this is because I haven't read a bio of him or anything, how much of it is like something that he did versus like kind of revisionist history on critics' parts, like trying to lump those periods together, you know, separating them out by the characters and things like that.
Well, he was very calculated. Like, I know what you're saying, Josh,
Yeah.
but he was very calculated. Like I said, he struggled when he was building these designed characters. He was a method actor. So it wasn't like, oh, you know, now we're going to call this the period. Like, he went in with a plan to do this stuff. Yeah, and that was part of what he struggled with. I know exactly what you're saying, too, because sometimes, like, oh, this is the period where this group did this, and it's really just critics lumping it together. But Bowie was a lot more calculated than that. He said, now is going to be the period where I am going to cover Blue-Eyed Soul with this take. Here's where I'm going to create a fame monster Ziggy Stardust, right? Here's where I'm going to go to Berlin and jump in head first in ambient music and electronic music, you know, and create a persona with each one. So,
but did that carry through after that period too? I mean, was he always creating characters, or did it just kind of tail off after the?
That was the 70s, and then at the end of the 70s, he kind of moved into the next stage. Yeah,
Gotcha.
But it's a huge part of his 70s narrative is the creation of these characters.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, Matt, what do you think of this album?
I like this album a lot. You know, I was afraid I was going to get a little bit more of a hunky dory thing, which was, you know, kind of an okay album, but I like this much better than hunky dory. So I'm still kind of interested as how that is. You know, this is number 7 on best ever albums for Bowie, and hunky dory was number 2. But I did like this better. This is. You know, I like the variety. There's some variety on here. There's different things that he's doing, like Aladdin Sane as the second song. You know, it starts off with a very more of a straightforward rock song with "Watch That Man," which is a great opener. I really like that song. It's it grabs you right away. And you're singing the chorus at the end of the song. I didn't really know. Actually, I would say I didn't know most of these songs going into this week. And then you've got Aladdin Sane, which is probably the most. I don't know. I guess it's a little bit avant-garde towards the end there, you know, more experimental.
Free jazz, maybe?
And kind of just, you know, like the offbeats and the chords that are kind of like off pitch, you know, but very interesting song. Like that a lot. New Drive-In Saturday, which I've always loved. That's a great chorus, and always like to sing along to that. And then the Gene Genie's the other big song on this, but the other songs really, like Time was a great song, and I thought that was interesting because I heard Queen. That was a Queen guitar.
Yes.
That to me was Brian May Queen, and I'm like, was Queen even around at this time?
Yes.
And I don't think their
debut
first
album 73.
Was it 73? Okay,
I believe so. I'll double check that, but I think it's 73.
But so it makes me go, okay, was Queen playing this stuff before and Bowie kind of picked up on that, or was it the other way around, that Queen didn't really start sounding like this but then took that? I don't know. To me, it was, as soon as I heard that, I thought of Queen. You know,
because they have like that wailing guitars on that song.
It's like a soaring anthemic, and it's even to the tone, right? Like I was like, did Brian May play on this? Like that's you know, I was literally going in that direction. But I thought that might have been my favorite song on here of the ones that I didn't know. I thought that was just a very interesting song. It kind of starts off almost like it's like a show tune kind of a thing. But goes in a little bit more of a rocking direction later on. Ending with Lady Grinning Soul, it's kind of like, I don't know how it just, like maybe more of a haunting kind of, that's a more intricate song as well, but there's variety here, you know, and Bowie's, and Sherry even commented, if we're listening to it, she goes, man, he just did all kinds of stuff. It's like, yeah, he did, like, you know, even within albums, not just, let alone his entire career. So very strong album. Was a little surprised of the Let's Spend the Night Together cover. When I saw that on the album, I was like, oh, he's going to cover. All right, that's fine. And he did a good job of it, and he definitely put a spin on it. It wasn't terribly different, but it was different enough, I think, to keep it interesting. Because I don't like when people do covers and it sounds like you're doing the same songs. Like, put a spin on it, do it different. So he does a fine job of it. I don't know if it's necessarily needed. Bowie certainly has plenty of other songs that that are great. He doesn't need to put covers on it, but he does. Yeah, he makes it his to an extent, and so I like that. Panic in Detroit's great. So just one great song after another. There wasn't a song on here I didn't like. Glad I got to listen to it because, like I said, I didn't. I really just knew the 2 songs on this, and I'm interested to listen to more. But very strong. Liked it from the beginning, and yeah, I think I think it's better than Hunky Dory. But and so yeah, thumbs up for me.
Yeah, before I get into my take, just so you know, Matt, the Queen debut album was September 4th, 1973. Yep. So about 5 months after this. However, the Queen debut was recorded, according to first time I'm putting my all music guide to use here. It was recorded over a year and a half. So they were aware of the Ziggy Stardust sound while they were recording. And basically, based on the review of the debut Queen album, the thing actually says, all of the band's future trademarks can be detected here, including Brian May's sweeping guitar orchestras. So in case you're wondering if the sound was there from the beginning, yes. But I think it would be Queen being influenced by, especially when you hear Man Who Sold the World and, Ziggy Stardust, which came out before, and then this, I'm pretty safe to say that would be, influence.
It makes more sense.
As with T-Rex too, which influenced Bowie's sound.
Right. It would make more sense that they would influence Queen, but it was just so like, not just the general sense, but that specific guitar sound, the tone was exactly like, and was very much a Queen thing. That is when I heard it anyway. So
sure, I agree 100% there, Matt. And I would say I really like this album as a rock and roll album. I thought it was the best rock and roll album of Bowie's that we've listened to sound-wise. Now, I'm not going to say best album. I do like Ziggy Stardust a little bit better. However, I almost it like both thematically and sound-wise, it definitely seems like the sequel to Ziggy Stardust. Yeah. I think it's not a lot less inferior, to be quite honest. There's just really good songs across the board. There's the Let's Spend the Night Together cover. That's a tough one because you hear Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, and it has a point of view, and I totally get it, and it's the type of song that if you're going to do it, I think you probably should do what Bowie did, which is come at it from a different angle of sexuality. I think if you're going to do it right, you maybe do it from the angle that people have speculated that Bowie did, right, from a homosexual standpoint, or like a female, right, flipping the script and writing it from a female perspective and stuff like that. But it's hard to do the Stones, with the same, combo of like sounding good but raunch that the Stones do. And he even raunched up the guitars a little bit, like the T-Rex-y guitars a little bit, but it's still, there's just something about that combo. So I didn't dislike it, but that's a tough one. But it fit very much in terms of the feel of this album. Like Josh, I picked up on the American theme very quickly, lyrically on this album and sonically on this album. And I know Bowie moves to LA and stays there for quite a few years, I think 2 or 3 years before he gets eaten up by LA and just leaves because he can't take it anymore, basically. But this is sort of near the beginning of that period of time. So, but Matt did a great job of, referencing some of the songs. Some of the deeper cuts I love on this. I love the song Cracked Actor. I love the placement of it on the album, and I love the song itself, and lyrically I really like it. I love the transition from Panic in Detroit into Cracked Actor into Time in a song placement. I really love that 4, 5, 6 combo. And it's also, if you're listening to the vinyl, it's the last 2 songs on side 1 and then Time starts side 2, which I think makes a lot of sense when you hear it. And then, as both guys mentioned, the Jean Genie Lady Gritting Soul at the end of side 2 is a fantastic 9 and 10 track. One thing I really love about Bowie is I admire his timing. His albums never overstay their welcome. His 70s, maybe his first album, I would say. I didn't think the content was as strong, but they never really overstay their welcome. The songs are always interesting. There's always twists sonically on what things sound like. He's he's great at appropriating sounds that he likes, but putting his own twist on it so that it doesn't seem like an exact copy, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So you hear all of the fathers of his music, both deep fathers like girl groups and doo-wop and things like that, along with the stuff that's in the moment that he's listening to, like being in the middle of the glam rock and, you know, adding in synthesizers and stuff like that. And then you can hear the influence, like Matt said, on Queen and music that was coming down the pipe as well. So I mean, he's pretty remarkable that way. This one's a strong recommend for me. I would say it's my second favorite Bowie album that we've covered so far. As Matt said, I think it synthesized the piano heavy approach of Hunky Dory with the themes of Ziggy Stardust and a little bit of the guitar of Man Who Sold the World, but it hit a lot more for me than those earlier albums outside of Ziggy Stardust did. So strong recommend for me. I enjoyed it.
It's always, back to the cover real quick, it's always weird covering a contemporary as well, because that song is not that old at this point. So I feel like it's versus somebody, you know, covers some old blues song that we've seen a lot of times, or some kind of quote unquote forgotten artist that the other one is, the current artist was influenced by and wants to cover him that way. So I think that Let's Spend the Night Together is probably the weakest song on the album, but that's still, I mean, it's still good.
And I just felt like, you know, kind of piggybacking off some of the stuff that John was saying too about it, it's that, you know, maybe if Bowie does a cover early on, like when he's just starting out, but he's at a point he doesn't need to do covers, you know what I mean? Like, and this is like, it's a wasted spot. You know, you could have put another brilliant Bowie song on here.
Well,
you know?
it's
I don't know if it's not needed. I don't know if this is needed, even if you're putting the spin on it, like the homosexuality aspect of it. Like Bowie could probably do his own song about that, and maybe even do it better, you know?
Yeah.
Well, going into the calculated nature of Bowie in some ways, part of the reason he put that on there was a wink and a nod to the Stones, who he felt heavily influenced this album.
Yeah.
So he's like, what better way to do it than to throw on a song I like and put my spin on it, but like a nod and a, you know, and he was always nodding to his influences, like the Velvet Underground and Ziggy Stardust and Iggy Pop in all of his, you know, and the Stooges in general. So it's like he does those wink and nods. Yeah.
Well, Panic in Detroit had to be influenced. I mean, that's a Bo Diddley riff that he's got going on in that song. You know,
it's a Bo Diddley riff influenced by Iggy Pop's stories.
Yeah.
So for sure. Yeah.
What if he had put all the young dudes on this album and recorded it himself? That would have been put that instead of Let's Spend the Night Together.
The story of that's fascinating too, because he just liked the band Mott the Hoople and they were really struggling commercially, and he's just like, I think this song will do it for you, and ding ding ding. Yeah,
really.
So that's it. So it shows just how prolific he was. Yeah,
people probably think it's a Bowie song.
I always thought it was Bowie. I thought it was Bowie years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. It sounds like a Bowie song because it was written by him, so it makes sense. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Matt, can you remind me where it falls on the Rolling Stone list?
It's not on it.
This is not on it at all?
No,
not
at all. Nope.
Come on.
No, Rod Stewart's better. Rod Stewart and James Taylor are better,
That's
Josh.
a travesty.
So
let's go into another thing where, well, they're different, so I can't. I mean, but let's just go. Let's go.
John's always the Rod Stewart defender.
I'm not the defender. It's just it's hard for me. It's hard to make binary comparisons between people trying to do different things. Let's compare it to Hunky Dory. I think if you're gonna, you know, I think it's weird to put Hunky Dory that high and have Aladdin Sane not on it. That's kind of to me a little bit. You know, if we're going more apples to apples.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. So, you know, not that I love those two albums, but I think let's you know,
they're for different people, right? That's or maybe different people looking for different things, perhaps.
Yeah, I just don't want like James Taylor and Rod Stewart to become offhand for like shitty music, because, you know, I think it's unfair. There's too many other acts that, you know, could fall in that. So I don't want us to get lazy, I guess is what I'm saying in terms of our comparisons. So, all right, guys, last thoughts here before I kick it. I think it's Josh next, right? Before I kick it over to Josh with Can. Thoughts? Final sayings?
No, it's great. Listen to it. I'm a fan.
I have a custom Aladdin Sane Bowie Lego that I
there's this Lego guy. It's got the
on the internet. I don't have it myself, but
Lego
looks
Bowie.
Cool. Yeah.
Lego Bowie, yeah.
Are we going to have to create like a Patreon account for you, Josh, so that we can get some money to have you buy Lego Aladdin Sane? Yeah.
I could probably do that without Patreon help.
Put in some ads to the show to raise some stuff for Lego Aladdin Sane. So, all right. Well, listen to this album. It's real good. Going